everybody. I see we have people coming in. We've got about 30 people all together. We're going to give everyone just another moment or two to join us. I just wanted to say good morning, good afternoon, wherever it is that you might be. If you want to pop into the chat and let us know where you are, introduce yourselves to the group. I'll be monitoring the chat. My name is Kendra, and I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the session today. But it is my honor to be able to introduce today's session, Second Act Series webinar called So You Want to Be a Writer with Andy Levine and Martin Herman. So I'm going to toss it over to Doug, and he is going to get us started. Doug? Doug in Naples, Florida. You always make me jealous.
Thank you, Kendra. And welcome to everyone. Welcome to Second Act Stories. We're really glad to have you with us today. My name is Doug Dixon. I'm board chair of Encore Boston Network. And in case you don't know us, Encore Boston is a community of people and leaders who are working to leverage the talent and to create opportunities for people over 50. Sometimes that takes the form of second acts, and that's what we're going to be talking about today with Andy and Marty. You can learn more about Encore Boston Network and sign up for our newsletter, find out about other events at encorebostonnetwork.org. And while you're there, we hope you'll join us. It's simple and it's free. This is Older Americans Month, which is celebrated each year to help end ageism in our society. Ageism is a barrier to employment, to economic security, to purposeful life and happiness for countless people in our society. But it also deprives businesses and other organizations, our economy, and all of us from the contributions of roughly 1/3 of our population. So with programs like Second Act Stories, we're hoping to demonstrate some of the ways that we can overcome ageism by using the talents, our talents as we grow older. I want to acknowledge and say a huge thank you to our sponsors for the Second Act series, Lexington Wealth Management, which is a fee-only financial planning and wealth management firm, and the Boston Globe, which I think probably needs no introduction. If you haven't already done so, as Kendra encouraged earlier, write in your name and location in the chat so we can see where you're from, and use the chat throughout the session today to enter your thoughts and to ask questions as we go along. We're going to start the conversation with between our host, Andy Levine, and Marty Herman. And then we will move after that conversation to a Q&A section. So use the chat, which you'll find along the bottom of your screen, to ask questions or to make comments. And we'll get to as many of those as we can between now and the end of the program. This is the second of a 5-part series of Second Act Stories, a collaboration between Encore Boston and Andy Levine, creator of Second Act Stories podcast series. You can see them all at secondactstories.org, and we encourage you to go to that link and shop around and see what you can find. There's a lot of fascinating stories there. Our goal with this series is to share information that can be helpful to all of us who may be asking ourselves the question about what comes next in our lives. And by learning about the experience of others, we can gain insight, we can gain inspiration, and we can gain information that will help us see possibilities that otherwise might not have been evident to us. Andy Levine has been doing this for several years. The idea for Second Act Stories was triggered by his fascination with storytelling and his own interest in second acts. He's traveled across the country from his home in Ocean Grove, New Jersey, to gather the stories of people who have made a significant career change to pursue a more rewarding life as a second act. By day, Andy leads a specialized marketing firm. We're excited to hear from Marty Herman today, who began writing a series of murder mysteries after leading a long career in business at the age of 75. You're about to hear his story, so we won't spoil it by saying anything more. But I will say welcome and over to you, Andy and Marty.
All right, Doug, thank you so much for the warm introduction. Marty Herman, welcome to this webinar series. It is great to have you join us today. I think it was about a little over a year ago that you and I met in your Connecticut home and had a great, wonderful interview, and I'm just really excited to have you join us here today. We like to start out with a little bit of audience input, and I'd like to share with you two questions. If you can just in the chat box type the quick answers to these questions, it'll give Marty and I a little bit of a sense of the audience. So since we're talking about writing today, we'd like to ask, who is your favorite author of all time? So just write down your favorite author, and we'll start to see them coming in. While those are coming in, Marty, I don't know if you want to pick one author who is your favorite.
I have a couple local Connecticut authors, Chuck Maselli, Kathy Orshek, Penny Goshen. They write wonderful mysteries. And I read most of the mystery writers, but the ones that I really love has always been Robert B. Parker because of the dialogue that he is able to do. And Agatha Christie, I read her Murder on Orient Express every June from beginning to end, and just love it to pieces because there are so many characters and she defines them so perfectly that you don't confuse any one of them in your mind.
I'm seeing a really interesting mix of different authors coming through here. I do want to keep things moving, and so I'll switch this now to even a bit more personal. I want you to imagine that you could write any type of book in the world. And you told us our favorite author. If you could write any type of book, what would you write about? And we've given you a couple of options here. I don't want you to feel limited to them, but just to broke it up into fiction and nonfiction. Marty, I think I know the answer to yours, but maybe just tell us. I'm seeing mystery, historical fiction, children's. Okay, a lot of different mix of different things.
I love mysteries, and
okay.
I love being surprised by my own mysteries.
Okay.
And over the recent time, I've enjoyed doing biographies. I have one finished and a couple perhapses, but basically it's still mysteries.
Okay. Marty, I want to get into your story here. And it's always good to start at the beginning. You grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Just give us a quick snapshot of the early years growing up in Brooklyn.
The best way to describe Brooklyn is that you think you have one mother and you have 90. It's everybody on the block that has a mother is your mother, and they can tell you what to do. And it was a very innocent time. We lost my father when I was about 12, and I think that really changed everything. At that point, you grow up very quickly, and we all had to go out and start earning a living. And,
we do have a photo from Brooklyn. Kendra, if I can trouble you to bring that up and just share with the audience here. Adorable shot of Marty. I don't know, is this 5 years old, Marty?
I would guess probably around five or six.
Okay.
That was my English Roadster.
Okay.
And it's responsible for 2 or 3 stitches on the back of my head because it tipped over one day.
Okay.
But I loved it.
Keeping things moving along here, when I interviewed you previously, you told me about an elementary school teacher who instilled in you an early love of writing. Can you tell us about Mrs. Abendola and how she got you interested in writing?
Mrs. Abendola of PS 16 in Brooklyn, New York, Williamsburg, was the kind of teacher that pushed you to do more than you thought you could do. And in my case, she kept telling me I had talent to be a writer. And many times I just didn't want to hear more. but I think of her each book I do. And in fact, in my first book, she's highlighted in several chapters.
Just even a little more of the backstory. As I understand it, you were in sort of an advanced class, and you were also working 8 hours a day after school every day.
That is
Uh,
correct.
and just tell us a story about how you started your creativity in terms of writing and kind of the story of making up stories.
We were expected to read at least one new book every week, and then every Friday report on it. And I went to school until 2:30 each afternoon, and by 3 o'clock I was on my first job. And during the week, it could go till 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock.
This is
During the
cleaning
weekends,
out
it
a
was
grocery
complete.
store.
I'm sorry.
Cleaning out a grocery store.
Oh, I've done. I cleaned floors in grocery stores. I delivered flowers. I went door to door
Okay.
Greeting cards. Before I was 14, I think I numbered 8 or 9 or 10 different jobs that I did and earned a living from. And so it was my turn on a Friday to give my report, and I hadn't been able to read another book. And so on the way walking to PS 16, I came up with a title and a rough idea of a story, and I delivered it that day. And I waited with bated breath because I knew Mrs. Amendola was smart enough to know that the author I had just given credit for probably never existed, and neither had the book, because somehow she knew everything. And she let me get away with it, not only that Friday, but every Friday that continued for that term. And on the last day of school for that grade, she pulled me aside, made me stay after school, and said, "I've got a homework assignment for you for the rest of your life. I want you to write a story every week. It could be a few sentences, it could be a few paragraphs, but at least it must include one character that, even if we don't like them, we care about." And I said, "Mrs. Amendola, I can't do that." And she said, "No, you can do that." Well, I missed a couple weeks, but not a lot. And by ninth grade, I sold my first short story. And I've been writing ever since, but most of the time it was just for me. Just before I turned 75, I published my first book.
And we're going to be coming to that, but I want to get to your first act. So for 40 years, you were a business turnaround consultant.
Yes.
Can you give us a picture of that and what exactly you did, what it was like?
I was brought in when all else failed. If a company was having problems, first they went to the big, at that point, 6 accounting firms, and then they would go to the high-priced consultants. And when all life was almost gone, they'd look for people within an industry. And I had worked in so many different industries that in the beginning I was brought in. And I quickly understood that what it takes to start a company sometimes gets in the way when it is a little more mature. And my whole concern was saving jobs. And at one point it was as few as 3 jobs. And at one point it was as many as 70 jobs. And after a while, you know what to look for. You walk in, you ask the people who are doing the jobs, what would you do if you owned the company? And generally they had the answer. The ones running the company rarely had the answer and were never going to accept responsibility. I loved it. It was as close to giving birth to a baby as a man ever comes.
You found the work really rewarding, it sounds like.
Very much so.
Okay, and you did this for like 40 years, something like that?
The better part of 40 years.
Okay. So I want to get to your first book and tell me the backstory of the Jefferson Files. And I know this involves a USA Today article being laid over in LAX International Airport and the start of an idea. Can you tell us about the start of the Jefferson Files?
Well, as you say, I was locked onto a tarmac in LAX for what seemed like years, but it was probably just hours. And I had nothing else to do. And so I pulled up the USA Today that was left at my door at the hotel that morning. There was a small news article about an FBI sting operation that included a United States senator and a number of mayors and all levels of politicians. And they were on the take, and the FBI was going to prove it. And just instantly what came to mind was, my hero has always been Thomas Jefferson. He's human. He has human frailties. But what would Thomas Jefferson have done if somebody said, here's a bushel basket of money? He was always in debt. He always needed money. Just give me a little of your influence. He was my hero. I would have hoped he would have thrown them out the window. But what if he didn't? And I took out a yellow legal pad, started playing around with what would Thomas Jefferson do. By the time I got home, I had several thousand words, an outline, and the last scene of what would Thomas Jefferson do. And I played with it for the better part of 10 years. And finally, I had 75 or 80,000 words, and I let my daughters read it. And they liked it. And between my daughters and the lovely Laura, they encouraged me, you must publish it.
Well, let me cut you off here for a second, Marty. We do have a special guest that we're going to have join us here now. Your daughter, Amy, will join us here on the phone.
Wow.
I'm seeing if you can make this happen, Kendra. But Amy, are you there?
I am.
All right.
Good morning.
So this is a surprise. We didn't tell Marty we were doing this. It's better if it's a surprise, right, Marty?
It is. It's always good to see her.
Amy, I want you to tell me when your dad brought you this book that he'd written. I guess it was, you said it was like 75,000 words. And I gather there was sort of like a, what do I do with this kind of thing? And just tell us about that conversation and how you encouraged him.
All I can really say is that he's always been deeply encouraging to me my entire life, never dismissive, never making me feel like what always encouraging me to just reach as high as I can. And so I just paid it right back to him. I mean, he and I growing up, we would just make up stories together. And so it was like our own little private imagination globe. And I encouraged him because how wonderful to be able to share your story and allow other people who don't love you, who don't know you, who don't get to, enjoy you as a dad, as a human being, and to just share that story. So I just said, you got to publish this. And I'm so glad that he did, because now he has so many fans and so many readers. And, writing is such a solitary thing. Nobody's behind you saying, you just did a great job. I loved that sentence. I can't believe you just wrote that. And my dad has just shared with me over the years how giving and thoughtful and just generous his readers have been. And that is really so much the fuel for him to keep writing these books.
Well, Amy, thank you for this hallmark moment in this webinar here. It's really, really sweet of you to share those comments. When you first saw the book, I mean, did you immediately have the reaction, this is pretty polished, this is something that will work?
Yeah, and here's the thing, here's just a little honesty right here. I don't normally read the kind of books my dad reads, but he's such a great writer that he locked me in just the first few pages. And I'm not just saying that. I mean, I love to read, but we all have our own way of just, some of us just, it's not our particular book. So yeah, I knew it was a great one, and they all keep getting better.
Okay. Amy, thank you for participating. We'll let you get back to work, and Marty, we're back to you. There are no other surprise guests, Marty, by the way. I can only get one daughter. So anyway,
thank you, by the way.
Oh, no worries. No worries. The result of this whole thing was the Jefferson Files, your first book. I don't know, Kendra, if you can pull up, we have a photo of the book jacket here that we can take a look at together. But tell us, Marty, what was that like at 75 years old? What was it like to publish your first book?
I can only tell you that when the first case of the first case of books arrived at my home, I couldn't wait to open it and read it as though I had never seen it before. It was just exciting to see my name on a cover of a book.
And I see from this we're in the 10th printing now of the Jefferson
It's going
Files.
into its 10th printing. We've gotten letters from all over the world, actually, people who have either been given a copy or bought a copy somewhere. Um, I'm just honored by the kinds of readership I have.
Now, over the last 5 years, you have become a writing machine. If we go ahead one more slide, Kendra, you have 6 books out for the Will James Mystery Series. Can you just tell us a little about, what this series is and who the heck Will James is?
I found out about the real person whose name was Jim James. In the 70s, there was a movie with Matthew Broderick called The War Games about this young kid who had hacked into the Department of Defense. And it just sat in my head for a while. When I started writing the Jefferson Files, it starts in 1806, and I quickly bring you to today. And my concern was, how do you bridge the 2 time zones and do it so it's realistic? And I thought of him. He was a computer hacker who could literally get in and out of anybody's computer, the real person. In my case, the first 2 or 3 printings, I used his name, Jim James. And at one of the appearances, a woman stopped by and she said, I'm Jim James's 3rd cousin. She said, and I found your book and it's entertaining, but could you change the character's name? Because every time anyone in our family hears his name, all we think of is how it ended. And at the age of 21, he committed suicide because he was tracked constantly by the FBI. They wouldn't give him a moment's peace. And so it became Will James. But it starts with the Jefferson Files, which is a historical novel. He then goes, and that was supposed to be it. I was not writing a series. I didn't even know what a series would be until the mail started coming in saying, tell me more about, at that time, Jim James. And so the Hidden Treasures Files became a way of me answering those questions. And by that point, I was hooked. And it led to the next 4 books, the 6th of which comes out on my mother's birthday, May 24th of this year.
Okay, and that's Will James' Last Files. Okay. So if we advance one more slide, Kendra, wow, Kendra, you're doing a lot of hard work today. You've also written 3 other different books that are up here. The middle one with your daughter Amy, who of course
Yes.
we just met a moment ago.
And that was a labor of love.
Okay, but you are writing essentially like a book and a half a year is what your pace is right now. After the first one took you 10 years, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. Just that's a lot of books. Can you, is it I don't know, is it just a labor of love when you're doing this? I mean, it just seems like a tremendous amount of effort.
Well, it isn't effort if you enjoy doing it. Nothing is considered work if you enjoy doing it. And I have enjoyed writing. I love writing because I love telling stories. And the way I do it, I create characters who take over for me. So I tell everyone I've only written maybe a half, maybe 2/3 of each book. The characters finish it for me. And I'm often surprised by how they do it. And I can do it as a reader and as a writer. What you have on the screen now, The Family Racusco, is a 500+ page historical novel of one family, 400 years, 10 generations, grifters and conmen and liars and cheats. And it's held together by a love story. And that premise sat in my head for years and years that I've always wanted to do it. But then another Will James book came in and that was priority. The one in the middle, the very special dress, was with my Amy, and it was just a labor of love. She wrote half the stories, I did, and we got together and said, what do we keep, what do we print? And the last book is a biography of at that point a 90-plus-year-old Connecticut musician who had literally played with everyone: Ella Fitzgerald, Sammy Davis, Billie Holiday, and the nicest, sweetest guy, who it turns out helped to build battleships during World War II. And I was just pleased to tell his story.
So one of the interesting things when we talked previously is the way you've gone about selling your books. And again, I'll have you advance one more, Kendra. But you've taken a very different approach. Everyone seems to think when they've written a book, I'm going to put it on Amazon and everyone's going to start buying it. Your experience has been a little bit different.
Yes. And
tell us about this.
And I have a great example. The book that I wrote with my daughter, we took a lot of time to pick the size and the paper and the ink because we wanted it to fit in your pocket. It was a book of short stories. Well, I gave it to Amazon. It was the last book I gave to Amazon. This is what they printed. It isn't quite the same book. It's a larger footprint. You can put this in your pocket or purse. And I didn't like the way it looked. It looked like a self-published book because one size fits all. And when I told my other writer friends, I'm no longer going to work with Amazon, they said, well, that's the end of your career. You can't live today without Amazon. Well, I found a way to do it. Before the pandemic, I appeared 225 days somewhere, at a church, at a craft fair, at a library, at a book club, and basically sold tens of thousands of, I have now probably close to 20,000 books in the last 5.5 years, one book at a time. And that's how I market.
And
through my website.
And you've actually made a living at this in terms of it pays your mortgage.
It pays my bills.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And are you always working on a book? I mean, is that just a constantly in your mind kind of thing? Okay. So it's once again, it's only effort if it's not effort because it's not real work. It's something you really enjoy. Of all the things you've done in your life, where would being an author rate?
I find it the most satisfying chapter in my life. I've enjoyed everything that I've done, but I have really enjoyed every aspect. I've enjoyed the business side of it, of finding a good printer and a great editor and a wonderful graphic artist, to the writing, to the editing, to walking around telling people I'm an author. Do you like to hear about mysteries? I just find that it was the perfect thing for this stage of my life. And I can't think of anything that I'd rather do right now, although I loved everything else I've done.
I do see a question coming in from Marilyn Anthony, and she asked, if you're not using Amazon, how are your books getting published?
I'm self-published. And that means that I do whatever it is that a publisher would do. I have a wonderful team. I have editors and graphic artists, and I contracted with a book publisher to print my books. Not a publisher, a printer.
Okay.
And I have a garage to prove it with all of my books. But fortunately, I'm able to sell on my various appearances.
Now,
and I encourage others to do that. It's not hard. It's only hard if you make it hard, but you have to be willing to talk about your books.
Now, the pandemic, I would imagine, has put a kibosh on some of your travels, but it sounds like you're starting up again in the week ahead.
Okay. I'll be appearing this weekend, Mother's Day weekend, in Massachusetts. And shame on me. I can't even give you the town. I can't recall. It's on another file.
But excited to get back on the road, I assume.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we're going to zip ahead one more slide to a slide we call Marty's Advice for Aspiring Writers. And I asked Marty in advance of this if he would kind of just think of a couple of different bullets, a couple of points, advice for people who are interested in writing. And it doesn't have to be a published book like what Marty has done here. It could be something a little more personal for a future generation, that kind of thing. Marty, can you walk us through these 5 bullet points?
Well, it's probably the most asked question that I get during my appearances. How do I write my story? I've got a great story. How do I write my story?
And
And
this
my
is
advice is
your
always
personal
the
story.
same. Their personal story.
Yep, yep.
And my advice is always the exact same. Just write it. It's your legacy. Nobody can tell your story better than you can. And so working along these bullet points, you have to start, and you can start anywhere. Start in the middle of your story and work backwards or forwards. The hardest part are the first 17 words or 20 words, and then you're on. Let it happen. Let it just open up. And for me, because I write faction, which is a combination of fact and fiction, I do a lot of research because I mix real people, places, and things with pretend. And at the end of each book, I tell you chapter by chapter what's real. I suggest to anyone who wants to begin, start with an incident. What happened last Tuesday? And why was it important for you to remember? And that becomes your story. And it doesn't have to be published. And you don't have to print hundreds or thousands of copies. Just leave it for future generations to know you were here. So I start with a brief summary. I create a backstory for each of my characters. That for me is fun. And then just start writing. Write with crayon if they don't trust you with sharp implements. But you got to start somewhere. And although most common sense will say, well, what about spelling? What about grammar? It's important, but not for the beginning. For the beginning, just get the story out. Flesh it out to the best you can, and then you'll review it. You'll have draft after draft. I probably now go through 18 or 20 drafts before it even begins to be ready in my mind for the editors to look at. And so you flesh out the story. At that point, you worry about grammar and spelling or hire somebody to do it for you, but let the characters do the story. And if you're telling about yourself, let who you were at that age tell that story.
I just want to delve a little deeper into sort of number 2 and number 5. Create a backstory for each major character. Let the characters tell the story. That's kind of an interesting concept. I mean, are you actually like charting out on a separate page? This is Will James' wife, and here's where she grew up. Here's where she
What
went to
does he
college. That
have
sort of
for
thing.
breakfast? What makes him angry? How does he show his temper? I picked up something from Penny Goshen when we talked about what do you want to know about your characters, and she said, I always try to think about what piece of clothing hangs in his closet that he has never worn and never will. And I find that that's a great way to dig into the psyche of each character. What they have for breakfast, what's in their closet that they will never wear, but it's important enough that it sits there, and why. And what do they like? What do they eat? What do they not eat? What do they say? What's their favorite expression? And when you're all done, you then start putting together, in at least I do it in my mind, which is, what do they look like? Are they tall or thin or fat or skinny? Do they have a big car, a little car? What do they love about life? What gets them up in the morning? And once you have that going for you, and you place your characters in a very acceptable device, storyline, let them continue.
So I know, and maybe the audience will know now, you do a lot of teaching for authors and writers. In at least pre-pandemic, a class that you used to put on. What is the biggest hurdle for people to get started writing? What is the barrier because everyone wants to write a book or a story or a poem and that sort of thing, but a lot of people never get to do that. So what do you perceive to be the barrier for most people?
I attracted an interesting group of students in each of the classes, and I learned to start with, just tell me how many here are writers, and nobody ever raises their hand. And then within the next half hour, I make them writers. Together, we write a story. Complete strangers put together a story, and that's how I start my teaching. And at the end of 15, 20 minutes, when we have a great outline, and it never has failed, I turn to them and say, now tell me who's a writer here, because you all have just done it. It's that easy. It's not hard.
Okay. So I'm going to ask the audience if you can start, if you have questions, type them in so we can start scanning through some of them. We want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions for everyone. There is one question from Mark Swanson, who writes, "What's your profit per book? How do you escape the Kindle series book push? Are your books available on a Kindle, first of all? And anyway, can you talk a little about the economics of what you do?"
It varies, and it varies a lot. An average book sells for $15 to $20 nowadays. And it depends on what you're willing to put into it. I can make a great deal more money if I had a more basic book, the kind of book that comes out of Amazon. But I choose really, really good paper, and I use a larger than average type font, which adds more pages, makes it more expensive. I would say that
we all appreciate the large font, by the way. So that's really, really appreciated.
Well, I would say that on average, you should probably clear $3, $4, maybe $5 a book. It isn't always possible. My margins are much smaller, again, because I really don't cut a lot of corners. And when I go to my book printer and they say, you can save some money if you do this or that, how will it affect the end look to my reader? Because my name is on that book and I want it to look good. So I wouldn't worry about the economics. The economics will work out for you. And if you break even, that's great. And if you can earn a living from it, as I am, that's even greater. But what's most important is getting your words on paper.
When you first published your first book, you mentioned, you shared the contrast with Amazon and that kind of thing. I mean, were you unhappy with just the look and the format, and you could tell quickly that you wanted to do something different in the next book?
Well, I read a lot, and it was easy for me to look at that first printing and say, this is amateur hour. It looks terrible. If I could have purchased back every copy of the first 2 printings, I would do it in a heartbeat if it took my last penny, because I wanted it to look like they look now. By the 3rd or 4th printing, I think I had it down pat as a business person. And it has to be something you're proud of because your name is on it.
Well, you're, just as a compliment, you were good enough to send me one of your books before we did our first interview, and the design, I mean, the writing, first of all, is just first rate and wonderful.
Well, thank you.
But the design and the product itself is also first rate, and so it certainly comes through. Love to get to a couple more questions here. Stephanie Foster asked, "I'm just curious about how you pull your ideas for your stories. Do you pull them from real life events? And how do you integrate real life events with historical events?"
It all comes from your experiences. And it might be something you heard 20 years ago that just resonated in your mind. For me, Laura complains that I jump around in bed a lot. And I jump around because
this is your wife, we should just point out.
I'm writing.
Yep.
I may be sleeping, but I'm writing. And so by the time I wake up, I have complete scenes in my head and I can't shut it off. I don't want to, but if I tried, I don't think I could anymore. something, I could be in a store and watch two people interact, and my mind instantly goes to, would that person kill anybody? And if they did, how would they do it? And why are they so angry? It's a constant thing. It's a curse, and I love it.
I'm encouraging everyone to continue typing in questions. I have a question from Helen. I'm writing my first novel.
Good for you.
Okay. Do you have any advice for first-time authors? Thank you.
Yes, write. Just write. Write your story out. You all know how to find me now. Go to my website. Remind me of having found me here. I will help anybody anytime. But the best advice I can give you is just write it. I learned a great thing from the biography. I wrote this gentleman's story as this gentleman remembered it and told it to me. I will promise you that anybody who followed his life or his children to this day disagree with a lot of what he said happened. Doesn't matter. It's his story. It's how he thought it happened, makes his biography. Helen, write your story. Don't worry about anybody. Just write it as you remembered it. What made you feel good about it? And if you have suffered from that story, the writing may get it off your chest to the point where you can breathe a little easier now.
Kendra has put up Marty's website, which is martinhermanauthor.com. And so we'll share that again at the end as well. But for those of you who want to check out Marty's books, they are excellent, and martinhermanauthor.com. Couple more questions. What do you recommend for people who want to write a memoir based on life experience?
You might want to first organize your thoughts. I don't have a lot of photos from when I was young, but you want to get all the photos together. You want to make a list of the people in your life that were important to you so that you can remember them in your story. Yes, if you're human, you might want to get even with a few people, and you know what? It's your story. Do it if you wish. If they're no longer living, it's a lot easier. But always remember that they may read it, and just bear that in mind. But I think it's just as basic as start. It may be a birthday party that went sour. Start writing that out as a scene. And then you may want to go back or forward, but that's the beginning of your book. The hardest part is the first sentence. The second hardest part is how to end it and go away, because you don't want to leave the reader asking the kinds of questions that you could have answered for them. But it's your story. Tell it as you wish and enjoy it. Have fun with it.
Maxine has a question. Can your books be found in public libraries?
I'm in some libraries, not many. I'm in some bookstores, not many. The best way to find my books is my website.
Okay, and as I recall, you will autograph a book for anyone who requests one, yes?
And I do. And that's something also which kept me from going back to Amazon. I have no idea who they sold my books to. I get a check every now and then, and that's wonderful, but it's not what I write for. I know every book that has left because I've signed it. And I gradually get mail from people because I encourage them to write me, tell me if I screwed up, tell me if you enjoyed it and why. And I've had now ongoing correspondence with so many people from 9.5 years of age all the way up to 92, from America all the way around the world. And so, yes, I sign every book. I want to see it before it goes out, and I want to make sure it looks great when you open it up.
A question from Stephanie. I do short stories and post them, but one got a couple of bad reviews. How, if you got bad reviews, do you handle them and move on?
The only review that matters is, did you do the best you could? And only you can answer that. You're not going to please everybody. You shouldn't have to try. If they didn't like it, they didn't like it. They won't come back. But hopefully more people will come back because you wrote so honestly that it reached them where it mattered. We talked about authors before. The best of all authors are the ones who remain alive in the minds of their readers. Don't worry about the bad reviews. Read them because maybe you can learn from it. But if it changes what you think is right to do, don't listen to them.
I have another question here. Can you really make a living at this, or is this more of a hobby for you?
It started out as, I don't want to say a hobby. It started out as an interest. I now pay my bills with it. I feel very fortunate that I can. It really depends on what you put into it. If I did not appear 200 days plus a year, no, I don't think I would have sold almost 20,000 books. And if I wasn't willing to stop everybody I ever see, do you like a mystery? Can I tell you about mine? Probably I would not have sold 20,000 or so books.
When you're at that book fair, I mean, it sounds like a really tiring day, and maybe because you're an extrovert, to me, as an introvert, it seems very tiring, but it sounds like you enjoy selling your books as much as you enjoy writing them.
Well, I enjoy talking about them, and I enjoy talking about them to people who read, and more people read than you think might read in this day of electronics.
I can't see who wrote this, but it's an interesting comment. I can't see the name, I'm sorry, but it says, I think it's Hemingway that said he writes for himself first and all else follows as they will. Any
Great
thoughts?
advice.
Yeah, okay, okay. A question from Vincent, or a comment, question, I guess. If you use your website to sell your books, how do people know you're even there? Well, I think part of the answer for Vincent is you don't just use your website. You are outside pressing the flesh and meeting with people one-on-one. But do you want to comment on Vincent's question at all?
I think one of the signs that you know I'm there is because I sign every book.
Different question. This is from Suzanne. Of all your books, which is your favorite?
I think if you ask any writer, they're going to say the last thing they wrote is the best they've ever done. The last book I wrote is the best I've ever done. And since I had a problem with the first book I wrote, for its 10th print, for the third printing on, I changed it every issue, every print run. Well, for the 10th print, I completely rewrote the Jefferson Files. New characters, new scenes, maybe another 10, 15,000 words. The last thing he wrote is the best he ever did, or she.
Now, one of the interesting things about your books, and this is, I think, through Patreon, but you actually will write a character, you know, if I wanted to pay a certain amount of money, you would write Andy Levine into your next murder mystery. Is that correct?
No, it wouldn't
Okay.
take you a penny.
Okay.
Where I appear, I generally have a drawing, and I give you an opportunity to fill out a slip. Just give me your email, whether you'd like to be a good character or a bad character.
I'd like to be a bad character, by the way.
And I draw those slips, and I have since my third book, and I do to this day, draw slips out. And then what I do is I don't just use your name. I interview you. I send you a series of questions back and forth, and try to make my character with your name as close a mirror image to you as I can. And I guess we're now up to maybe a dozen or maybe a dozen and a half different people over the last 6 books that have been included. But no, it doesn't cost you anything.
Okay.
And
okay.
I give you a signed copy.
Okay. Question from Perkins, and he said this is a slightly personal question. How much does it cost to create a decent website? And your website is beautiful, by the way. It really, I'm sure it was developed over a number of years, Marty, but it's really a well done website. I hope everyone will get a chance to visit it. So, how much does it cost to buy to create a really good website?
It varies. I can't even tell you what I paid because I don't remember. It was so long ago, but The first one, this was maybe my third or fourth. The first one I had, I just went to a site that said, we will build your website. And I didn't feel comfortable navigating through it as an outsider. And so I wanted one that was user friendly. And I have one now, and it was done by a great lady whose name is Delilah of Imagine Publicity. And she has done mine. And anybody who writes in, I'd be delighted to connect you with her.
So Ann Ogletree asks, why did it take so long to produce your first book, given your lifelong love of writing and storytelling? 10 years it took you to do the Jefferson Files.
Writing for me was a very personal thing. I wrote for an audience of one, me, and gradually an audience of three, me and my two daughters. And some of the writings I did over the years became bedside stories, and some just became things that kept me busy while I was on the road, as my day job kept me out 200,000 or so miles a year. And so I was always in a strange city, in a strange hotel room. I don't drink. I don't run around. My idea of an orgy is a big box of M&M peanut, a Diet Coke, and maybe even a small container of Haagen-Dazs. And I would sit and write. And I'd come home from every trip and throw what I did into a big paper box in the basement. And when the box was full, I would dump it out in the garbage and start all over again. The one exception was this manuscript that became the Jefferson Files, because it just, it interested me to see it through. And so it never made it into the box. But I never would have published anything if I wasn't encouraged by my family to do so. And I'm glad I did, because it opened up all kinds of doors for me.
Question, well, again, I can't see the name of the person who sent this in, but let me read it to you. Do you know which generation of readers actually read books the old-fashioned way? And by that, I mean sitting down with a physical book, smelling the paper, turning the pages, being transported accordingly. I'm curious if you think this is a vanishing art of reading.
I hope not. But what I'm learning is that the older readers prefer the electronic way of doing it because they can make the print as large as possible, which is one of the reasons why I use larger than average print fonts. But there are still people in every age group, including the youngsters, who enjoy the smell of the ink and the feel of the paper and being able to go back and forth. Those are the people I write for.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. Marie Scavato asks, do you write every day on a particular schedule? If you're having a bad day or conversely a great one, does that manifest in your writing?
Up until very recently, I have written every day. And usually into the night, and usually from the middle of the night in the morning when it's quiet in the house. I've had some health issues, and so for that reason, I find it a little more difficult to do it every day. But I'm thinking of what I'm writing every day. I'm dreaming of what I'm writing every day. And so the process is continuing, although it's now taking a slightly different form.
We'll give the last question to Doug Dixon, and he asks, when does the end come for Will James?
Well, if I asked Laura, she would say, never, don't you dare do it. And the only time she's ever argued with me was the title of this most recent is Will James' Last Files. But it's such a rich character, and I've surrounded him with such wonderful secondary characters that it may never end.
Okay. Advice, and I'm going to take you off writing just for a moment, a question from me. You did something for a very, very long time, business turnaround consulting. As you said, you loved it. Then you switched gears and did something completely different. Was that a hard leap to make for you to change that way?
No. And I don't know if I should be surprised or not, but no. What I did as a turnaround person was learn about various businesses and problems that are created within. As a writer, I'm learning about various problems and how to solve them, or how to get out of them, or how to avoid reproducing them. It's not that different. It's just a different form.
Okay. I think on that note, we want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're coming up at the end of the hour here. If we can go back to the screen, Kendra. Kendra does all the technology, by the way, and she does an awesome job. So thank you for taking care of us here. I just want to give you a little bit of background, then I'll turn it over to Doug to close us out here. For those who are interested in listening to stories like Marty's, I come out with a new podcast every 2 weeks in which I interview someone who's going through a second act. And if you're new to podcasts, you can just go to www.secondactstories.org, select any episode, and there are 94 episodes up there. Marty's episode is number 70, and you just select the episode, click on the blue triangle, and you'll hear that person's story in about 15 or 20 minutes. If you listen to podcasts a lot, you can just go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, type in Second Act Stories, and you'll be able to listen to these stories. So with that, I think, Doug, I'll turn it over to you to close things out for us here.
Thank you, Marty, for your candor as well as your wonderful story. And Andy, thank you as well for bringing Marty to us, and also Second Act Stories. Next up in this series, we will have Laura Raposa and Steve Sire, and that's on May 24th. That's a Monday. For those of you who don't know, Laura Raposa was a longtime columnist with the Boston Herald, and Steve Sire is a longtime business reporter for the Globe. As the newspaper business began to change, they left journalism and started a food business in Duxbury. So they will be sharing their experience as well as lessons learned along the way. So you don't want to miss this. It's a local story. And we'll send you the registration link along with a link to the recording of today's session in a couple of days. But you can go to our website, which is encorebostonnetwork.org, to both find a recording, but also to sign up for this and for future Second Act stories. I want to, before acknowledging our sponsors, also mention that there's a special program coming up on May 20th called The New World of Work, featuring acclaimed experts and authors Carrie Hannon and Marcy Alberher, who will be talking about the impact of the pandemic on the ways that people work. They'll touch on trends like remote and freelance work, self-employment and entrepreneurship, the gig economy, working in a multi-generational workplace, and more. We'll be sending the link for that along, as well as the links to future Second Act Stories and to the recording from today's conversation.
Just one editorial comment, Doug. Carrie Hannon and Marcy Alberher are absolutely first-rate people. They've both been on my podcast. I actually had them on together, and you won't want to miss the May 20th event. They are absolutely fantastic speakers.
Thank you, Andy. And we do want to acknowledge our sponsors, Lexington Wealth Management and the Boston Globe. And thanks to all of you for participating today. Before you leave, we ask that you go into the chat one more time and tell us your thoughts about our session today. Did you find it helpful? Any suggestions, any comments? We'd like to learn from your experience, and hope to see you again in a couple of weeks with Laura and Steve's story about starting a new business. Thanks, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Marty.
My pleasure. Thank you.